is the Forbes Books podcast, conversations with amazing humans who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and we all go through ups and downs in life. And if you lived and worked in New York City in the first decade of the 2000s, it was the ultimate roller coaster. And my guest this week was on that ride. Scott Freidheim worked in Lower Manhattan on September 11th and was a senior leader at Lehman Brothers during the financial crisis in 2008. But that's only one part of the story, which you can read about in his new book, Code of Conduct, Tales of the Roller Coaster of Life. It's a captivating first-hand account of extreme ups and downs with takeaways about life and uplifting principles to live by. But don't take my word for it. He's gotten endorsements from the likes of golfing legend Jack Nicklaus, tennis great Monica Seles, and Jerry Greenwald, the former chairman and CEO of United Airlines. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. And I want to start by talking about risks. I will tell you, Scott, I am not a risk taker. Since I was a little kid, you know how there's children who will jump off things and light things on fire. I was never that kid. And I grew up to be an adult like that, to not take risks. And sometimes, I look back and regret, I'm like, man, I wish I took that swing there or not. But tell me about your relationship with risk. And I know that's a big part of what you're doing now, talking about risk, and it's a big part of the book. But give me your relationship with risk. What's when I ask you about the word risk, what comes to mind?
I think we're all wired a little bit differently. Having been in private equity and Wall Street for over a quarter of a century, I could give you sort of the math answer. But I think, code of conduct is more about a reflection on what matters in life. And in my case, I'm wired in such a way that, call it a glutton for punishment, glutton for excitement. I put myself in situations where there are going to be somewhat extreme outcomes. I've done it throughout my career. When I played Division I soccer, for example, I really wanted to be the penalty kicker. And soccer is it's almost always 0-0. And once in a while, you get a penalty kick, and that's a pressure cooker. So I've typically wanted to do that. We all are on a roller coaster of life. Mine had some pretty steep ascents and steep declines. But to me, risk is about how much excitement, how much return or potential loss do you want. It's putting yourself out there.
And it's funny about risk because we sort of embolden risk takers in America. We put them on our shoulders. We're like, these are the people, the country was built on risk takers. Is that in your DNA? Do you think you were born that way? I mean, you mentioned you were in soccer. You were is that just part of your being?
I think that's part of my being. And the funny thing about what you said about the U.S., celebrating risk takers, we don't typically pay that much attention to all the people who failed. So acknowledging the number of times that we fail is important. It's easy to say, and I believe it's true, that you can't really get anywhere without taking some form of risk. That being said, it should always be done with eyes wide open, that when you're taking that risk, there are unquestionably going to be some bad outcomes. I've certainly lived a whole bunch of those. But as a country, it's fun celebrating the people who threw the Hail Mary pass at the end. Someone caught it, and we celebrate it.
Yeah. And let's talk about those peaks and valleys of yours, because you and I were both in New York during some very turbulent times. Obviously, in 9/11, 2001, and then the financial collapse of 2008. And I recall I was a radio guy, so I wasn't deep in the weeds in Wall Street or working in Lower Manhattan at the time of both of those events. But I do know how those moments sort of rippled through the entire city and the country. Thinking back on those two moments, what are some of the things you learned that made you a better either human or better leader?
So let's tackle 9/11. And if you hear my voice crackle at all, it's because, it's something that you never shake. It sticks with you forever. On 9/11, I was in 3 World Financial Center, which was, today it's known as 200 VZ Street. That's the building that was connected to the North Tower of the World Trade Center by a bridge. when the first plane hit, I was on the 10th floor. When the first plane hit, my exec admin screamed, ran to the window. I was on one of the inside offices. So I got up and quickly went to take a look. And I looked up the World Trade. I was on the 10th floor. The World Trade Center, so high, so tall. But I saw huge black smoke hemorrhaging from one of the very high floors. So I knew that it was something really bad. I immediately called my brother, picked up the phone, got him out of his morning meeting, and I said, they just bombed the North Tower. It's 100 times worse than 93. I'm out of here. So I walked to the elevator. Obviously, it wasn't a bomb. I was wrong in my assessment of what it was. I went to the elevator and I pushed the button, and I thought to myself about the thousands and thousands of people that we had in this building and other buildings. And at the time, I was in the office of the chairman and CEO of our company, and he wasn't on premise. He was in Midtown. So I was like, I can't go. So I immediately went into his office, and a handful of us who were the senior executives at the time placed a call. As is, and as you know, in New York, Wall Street's incredibly hierarchical. So there was no opportunity for any of us other than who was the de facto most senior person at the time, who was the chief administrative officer talking to our chairman and CEO, to interject. But the decision that he was pushing was stay. I thought that was the wrong decision. I walked out of the office, told my exec admin not to discuss it with anyone, but I mandated her to leave. I actually told her that I'd fire her if she didn't leave. And she left, and that made me feel good. I quickly ran downstairs to go to the sidewalk to see firsthand on the street, how did it look? And it looked really bad. So when I went upstairs, by the time I get in back into the office and a couple execs were still there, the second plane hits. We immediately call the chairman and CEO, and same thing played out, actually made the decision to shelter in place. Now, at that point, I thought, I can't let this sit. I have to have a bite at the apple of logic, even though the transit authority was saying, we're still gathering information and stuff like that.
And I will say, Scott, your company was not an outlier, because if I remember this distinctly, that people in the World Trade Center were told to stay in place. So it's not like your company was just like, oh, we're going to be stubborn and do this. A lot of people were told to stay where they were when those planes hit.
Yeah, and some of the conversation that we had on the phone was, you don't know if there are chemicals involved, bioterror, that kind of stuff. So is it safer inside or out? I looked for someone whose face might have a look of consternation. I found one in our chief legal officer. So once the chief administrative officer hung up the phone, I said, hey, do you have a second to have a chat? He's like, yeah, what do you want? I'm like, no, I got to show you something in my office. And then in the office, I was like, it's a perfectly clear day. 2 planes hit. We're the next tallest building downtown. We're known as the American Express Tower. So he was like, you got to call the chairman. I was like, no, the reason I brought you in the room is because you're the 60-year-old wise man, former managing partner of Cadwalader, Wickersham Taft. So he was like the season. So anyway, long story short, we get back in the room because 2 sentences into the logic, the chairman CEO was like, I want everyone out now. Everyone was evacuated. But at that point in time, I'd seen so many people who, and I've talked to some psychologists, psychiatrists about this. When trauma hits, there's fight and flight, but there's a point where people freeze. And during the course of that, whatever it was, I had seen so many people just freeze. So I felt that, I was still thinking pretty clearly, so I stayed. And I was thinking, what is the next thing that I can do that can help the firm, help our people, whatever it might be. The time that I had, it was about another half an hour in the office, was extraordinarily unproductive. And I was fixated to, it was, whatever New York One or whatever that channel was, because they had the most people on the ground. I actually didn't start getting out of my way until the South Tower was collapsing and I was still in the building. And as you know, from pictures of the Winter Garden in our building, had the North Tower gone first, I don't think I'd be here. It sliced through. It's starting at like the 17th floor. I was on the 10th, and it took out lots and lots of offices and that kind of thing. So, but it made me reflect on, why am I still alive? What's my purpose? You were struck by the dichotomy of, a Wall Street life versus the thousands of selfless community heroes that we have. The firemen going up the building, knowing that it's going to be their last ascent, but fire, first responders, police, it was a wake-up call for me as it related to how society celebrates different people. And since then, I've always taken the opportunity with my children or whatever, hug policemen, thank them every time, fire, veterans, war fighters, humanitarian aid workers. To my mind, these are the heroes in our community, and we should all aspire to have a code of conduct that's as selfless as the ones that they live by every day.
And 2001 happens, and as you know, it took forever for them to erect a new World Trade Center. I think it was nearly 20 years when they finally were able to do that. But along the way, things are starting to build up, and then 2008 happens, the financial crisis. Again, another ripple that started in Lower Manhattan and kind of hit the rest of the country. Obviously, not at the same scale as 9/11, but it still had a aftermath that affected many, 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 many people. Take us back to those early days with Lehman Brothers and the crashes of multiple companies. Was your same level-headedness that you had on September 11th the same, fast forward, another decade?
It was a protracted period. One was a series of events that happened so fast that were so traumatic. Another one was a completely different thing. I hear you. It was a tidal wave that I think estimates are 10 trillion of value loss. For us, the real wake-up call was the weekend that Bear Stearns went under and had to be rescued by a combination of the government and JP Morgan. I called our chairman and CEO and I said, "We're it." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "We're it. We're next. We're the next smallest." And when you look at all of the cycles on Wall Street, the little guy gets taken out. We were next smallest. So he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I think we got to put together a game plan on getting a halo investor, selling the company, combining with a bank." A lot of this had to do with, were you a bank holding company? And if you were, then you could get funding from the Fed. So broker-dealers didn't have that opportunity. So us, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bear Stearns, we had to get funding elsewhere. I don't subscribe to illegal activity. There's no one who I knew who did something illegal. They're incredibly privileged seats to be in. That being said, every one of the broker-dealers, investment banks, was taking a degree of risk that could sustain 50 years of various economic cycles. However, that's, say that's a 97% confidence. What hit the global financial crisis was beyond that. So everyone was going to fail, and the government had to act. I have a lot of empathy for them. A lot of the smartest guys in the room were the ones working at the Fed. These are incredibly talented people, but there they are trying to save the financial system, and they've already saved a handful, Freddie, Fannie, Bear, and the pressure, if you remember at that point in time, to let someone fail, like forget about Wall Street, let them fail, save Main Street, not Wall Street. Obama and McCain were on the presidential tours saying the same thing. It's about time we save Main Street. And there was no political will in Washington. So the weekend where everything came to a head, that's what Geithner and Paulson were telling people. There's no will. So forget about a government solution. You guys figure it out. We actually thought we had a deal with Bank of America. I was on the phone with our chairman and CEO with the chairman and CEO of Bank of America, and the call finished up with, good to be your partner. But things were moving so fast at that time that over the course of the next, call it 12 hours, they ended up with Merrill Lynch. There was an heroic attempt by Bernanke, Paulson, Geithner to mitigate the damage. That being said, I don't think there was an ability to save Lehman Brothers. Rather, there was just no appetite. So if you want to call that the inability, fine. But what differentiated us from the others is that we were the smallest. We all sort of had the same amount of what was most important as it related to continuity. We all had the same amount of level 3 assets. Those are those very illiquid assets that are very difficult to say, how much is that worth? 5,000 acres in California, and you're halfway building a golf community. What's that worth? A stock, a government bond, those are very easy. So those are level 1 assets. But we all had the same relationship of level 3 assets to equity. So we all had the same kind of funding needs on a relative basis. But, lessons for me, I think the government has to continually have their finger on the pulse of, do they have the regulatory tenor right? So, it's been a while. We haven't had a formal Basel IV. I think enough times passed. A whole bunch of regulations were put into place in a hurry after the global financial crisis. I think they should have another, okay, did we go too far? Not far enough? Just, check in a really formal way. I think it's one of the things we have to do. There are certain things that were put into place in the federal regulations that make it actually harder to rescue banks. And then, somewhat controversial, I think there should be a look at whether a fund is created where banks have to contribute money into a rainy day fund. So if anyone in the industry is about to fail and trigger, and we saw this a year ago, and they're about to trigger some form of systemic risk, the participants in the industry will have already created the fund to bail them out. So it's not the American taxpayer who is going to have to bail out Wall Street. The street will have already funded it.
That almost sounds like it makes too much sense, Scott. I think it's too logical what you've come up with there.
Well, I think one of the problems is Wall Street funds a lot of politicians. So if you're the guy who raises the hand and says, hey, let's create a fund that's going to be paid by you, not so sure I'm going to support that guy. So I say it knowing full well that I'm continuously thinking about how I can serve in light of my edge of life experience. But that sounds to me to be a solution that should work. And you can calibrate it based on the size of the firm, the degree of risk that they're taking, the level of liquidity that they have. So there's a way that you can make it fair that people who really want to take a lot of risk really put themselves in a position to make a ton of money, but that creates systemic risk for the system. They'd have to contribute the most.
Awesome. And that brings us to the book, Code of Conduct. And in the book, you talk about this code. Is this something that you've been developing? Has this been sort of something that's been part of your everyday life? Or is this something that came about after you going on this roller coaster?
After the fact is the short answer. What happened was I'm on the board of trustees of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Foundation. The headquarters are in Colorado Springs. I live in Aspen, Colorado. I was supposed to give a speech to a bunch of the heads of the national governing bodies, like USA Track and Field, USA Basketball, that kind of stuff. My Division I soccer days are long gone. I'm fat, out of shape, balding. So, as you know, engaging an audience, you got to connect with them on some level. And I was thinking, how am I going to connect with this, the ultimate in sports
without taking your shirt off?
Yeah, well, that would certainly have everyone head for the hills. So I thought, you know what? I haven't ridden a bicycle in 2 years. I'm just going to bike there. And I checked it out on Google Maps, and it was like, 12,000 feet of vertical climb, and it was 200 miles. And I was like, you know what? I'll give myself 2.5 days. And then someone will casually say, hey, you live in Aspen. How'd you get here? I biked. And then it'll be one of those, just do it kind of moments. Anyway, it was a stupid idea. I did miserable planning. It's highway with, at many times, no shoulder at all, going through canyons. So trucks can't see. I'm 20 miles from Colorado Springs on that third day in the morning, and I saw lots of rocks on the shoulder of the road. So I checked behind. It was 2 lanes, one going each way, 60 mile an hour. So cars are typically going around 70. So I go over the rumble strip to get on the highway because no one was coming down the hill in the direction I was going. I was going around 30. And the wheel wobbles left, right, eject. So now I'm in the air going right at a white truck. I did the mental math. And I'm a math guy, there was 0 chance of surviving. When I hit the pavement in the middle of the 2 lanes, heading in the direction of the grill of the truck, it was kind of like those GoPro videos where you see someone on YouTube where they get in a ski crash and they had a GoPro. It's a series of indecipherable images. You can't synthesize them. Your brain just sees a whole bunch of images. And I was just waiting for the lights to go out. And at that moment in time, I thought about my family, and I thought, hopefully they'll be fine. My kids are young, so I've seen lots of fatherless families, and that's really tough. What I realized, and again, I'm one data point, so take this as one data point. There was only one relationship that I had on earth, and that was with God, and everyone else is on their own journey. I'm on my journey, and I have one relationship. And the only thing that mattered in life was, how did I live my life? What you achieve, accumulate, accomplish is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is how you live your life. I opened my eyes. I did not pass on to wherever we go next. And then a series of things happened. Airlifted, fentanyl, trauma center in Colorado Springs, but I lived. So the question was, what do I do with that? I've read a handful and I've seen thousands of books by former CEOs. I think they're a dime a dozen, and I'd never write one of those books. However, if someone said they were at the edge of life and they had a revelation, and the revelation was something, I would listen to what that is, because it's one of the big question marks as we walk our way through life. So my revelation was, how you live your life is the only thing that matters. I didn't know what to do with it, but I know that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be pursuing making sure that I do whatever I can to live a life so that, fortunately for me, I get a second chance. When I'm in that moment next time, I'm going to feel great. But code of conduct was the first product of what I'm trying to do, which is to tell people, you got a personal goals list. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to do so many push-ups. I'm going to run a marathon, whatever it is that you're going to do with your personal goals. I've got my professional goals. I want to have 10 million followers. I want to be the CEO of whatever. You got that. I think there should be a third list. And the third list is, what are the tenets by which you aspire to live by? Code of conduct, that's what it is. I'm not saying what a code of conduct should be at all. All I'm doing is I'm saying, I got mine. You might want to think about what yours is, because if your edge of life experience is like mine, then you're going to want to have lived the life, the behaviors that deliver on your moment and legacy in the way you want it to be. The whole book is a series of tales. The tales, for me, are incidental relative to the purpose of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to promote the golden rule. It's in every religion. Buddhism, Taoism, Judaism, Christianity. It's in all the religions. Today, more than ever, we have a secularization that's muting the aspirational standards of behavior that all religions promote. We've got a national media that's as polarized as ever. In our country, you have for-profit entities that control those national media. They want eyeballs, so they create tension by focusing on the tails. And those tails drive us insane. That's what they're doing. Social media cares about clicks. By and large, it's abhorrent behavior that gets the most clicks, not admirable behavior. So I think we've got free will. We've got to exercise it. We have to make sure that, take the corporate America, big tech. They're filtering information to us to optimize their value, not ours. We got to make sure that we live our lives so that we're optimizing our value. When we're in that moment, the edge of life, we're proud of how we lived our life. That's the message I'm trying to promote.
That's awesome. Have you been on the bike since?
I bought a motorcycle. I got on the motorcycle, turned it on, and said, I just can't do this. Then I got a bike. I went for went for one bike ride, and that's all I've done. It's hard. It's hard to get back on the bike, so to speak.
Yeah, no doubt. And now that you've written this and you've put everything out there, and I know a lot of people feel this, that writing a book is one of the most cathartic experiences you'll ever have in your entire life. What kind of sort of cathartic, deep, emotional sort of connection did you have while writing this book where it hit you that, you had the idea for the book, you had sort of the codes that we've been discussing, but there's always that moment while you're writing where you're like, yes, I've nailed it. Did you have one of those type of moments while you were putting this together?
I didn't really have I nailed it, but I'll tell you that the book is a relatively universal book. So I tried to make it so that anyone high school onward can pick up the book, read the book. You and I have had some elements of this conversation, which were somewhat technical around the global financial crisis, but the book is a teaspoon of sugar. It's light stories. I deliberately tried to make the stories a series of curtain reveals on moments, people, and places in time that people know about so they can relate to them. So in the locker room with George Foreman after he fought Evander Holyfield, what did he do? What did he say before he went on to do the Foreman Grill? I talk about some moments in Buckingham Palace, 9/11, which we talked about, Arab Spring in the Gulf when I was working in Bahrain and traveling throughout the Gulf states, Michael Jackson, Neverland Ranch. I try to do a curtain reveal on a lot of those things to make it a fun, easy page turner. The chapters are 2 to 5 pages. I don't have the arrogance to believe that I deserve more than 2 or 3 pages of your attention on any given topic. Everyone stands on its own. So the body of the book is simply to stimulate people's curiosity on people, places, and things that they know about, but there's a story like the Warren Buffett one where they haven't heard that one. The purpose of the book is what we talked about, which is it'd be great if people had a third list. Then I will have delivered on my mission. By the way, I'm giving 100% to charity. This has nothing to do with anything about promoting me or anything other than I just want to make the world a better place. And that was my crack at it. But you don't see this until the epilogue, but I put from an architecture perspective, my tenets of behavior that I aspire to. And again, yours are going to be different. Everyone's going to have their own. But I put them on a philosophical and spiritual framework. 1, Plato's cardinal virtues, and these 32 tenets fit neatly 8 into each one of these 4 cardinal virtues. And the Beatitudes, I'm a Christian, 4 fit neatly into each of the 8. So what I say, and I say it on my website, which is just scottfreidheim.com, you can take a personalized quiz answering 10 questions, and it'll give you your own. So if you believe in Eastern philosophy, it will spit out something that's grounded in that. If you're Islam, Buddhist, Judaism, whatever it is, you can come up with your own tenets of behavior that suit what you believe in, whether it's spiritual or not at all.
That's awesome. His name is Scott Freidheim. He is the author of Code of Conduct, Tales of the Roller Coaster of Life. Scott, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful being with you. Thanks so much for having me.
And that's going to do it for another Forbes Books podcast. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila or TikTok at J Pardavila. And please, don't forget the aforementioned golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.